I welcome Jim Talent, former U.S. Senator from Missouri, chaired the Seapower Subcommittee in the Senate, now chairman of the National Leadership Council at the Reagan Institute, and Captain Jerry Hendrix, United States Navy aviator, retired senior fellow at the Sagamore Institute. Gentlemen writing at the National Review Online on sea power in the 21st century. We begin with remarks by Politifact suggesting that the Navy is over-complaining about its mission compared to the number of ships it has to work on the endeavor of the challenges around the globe. In the National Review article, Senator Talent and Jerry Hendrix identify the four missions of the U.S. Navy. Right now, we'll establish that the Navy is 290 ships, way short of the ambition mentioned in Congress these last years. I believe the number 350 has been used, maybe even higher. So we're not now where we need to be. And according to the reporting in the National Review Online, we have no expectation of reaching that until mid-century. So this is a forward-looking conversation, not about now only, but also about the next generation at sea. Gentlemen, good evening to you. I begin with you, Senator, because you have memory of the Seapower Subcommittee at the Senate, where you were then, where you were now. Can we say that progress has been made, or is there backsliding? Good evening to you, Senator.
And good evening to you, John. I wish I could report real progress on this issue, but I just don't feel that I can. I do believe people are more concerned now than they were a few years ago about the relative strength of America's armed forces, particularly vis-a-vis China. But I can't say that there is any plan been put in place or about to be put in place to really, with energy and purpose, do something about it. And that's particularly with regard to the Navy. I mean, the Navy is mooting around different figures that it wants the Navy to grow to over different periods of time. And in my opinion, if you don't have a concrete figure, a concrete timetable, and a concrete plan, it really means that you haven't resolved to do anything. And so, no, I can't tell you that I think a lot of progress has been made.
290 ships, Jerry, that's the number I'm going to use. So you explain in the article a ratio that is necessary to understand what the Navy can do and can't do. Before we come to the missions, what does it mean 3.5 to 1? How to interpret that, Jerry?
Good evening. Good evening, John. And so over the last almost 50 years, since we first established the regional combatant commanders, whether that's the European theater commander or the Pacific commander, who has now become the Indo-Pacific commander, Southcom, Northcom, all of these regional combatant commanders have put in their requests for ships to the Pentagon. And these requests add up to quite a large number. It's almost 130 to 150 ships at sea on any given day. They've identified 18 maritime regions of the world. Some of these regions are relatively close to the United States. Some of them are quite distant from the United States, from the main ports. And so in order to keep naval ships flowing to all of these locations, it takes between 3 to 4 ships for every ship that's forward deployed, because generally there's one ship that's in the yard under deep level maintenance. One ship is working up, going through its maintenance, its training, its crew selection, etc. Generally, there's a ship sort of in transit to the region, and then there's a ship coming home. And then, of course, there's the ship that's on station. So what you require in order to maintain 130 to 150 ships forward is 3.5 ships for every one that's required forward. That's what actually drives, or should drive, the size of the battle force in the Navy. But quite frankly, we have gotten a long way from there, where if you think about 130 to 150 ships, well, you're talking really about between 450 to over 500 ships to maintain that type of presence. And we're at 291 ships as of this morning.
Senator, I come to you because there are 4 missions for the U.S. Navy identified in your article, the National Review Online. The first, you write, seems to my reading the most important. It involves the nuclear ballistic missile submarines, the SSBNs. What is their mission? Why are they primary, Senator?
Well, our nuclear submarines are the third leg of the nuclear triad. In other words, we have three different ways of delivering nuclear weapons in order to deter nuclear attack against the United States. Our bombers, our land-based missiles, ICBMs, and the submarines. And the submarines, I think if you ask most people about this, they would say they're the best of the three deterrent, because since the submarines move and are very, very difficult to track, an enemy cannot be certain at all that they can get the submarines before we respond. So they're an absolutely vital part of the defense of deterrence of nuclear war. And therefore, I think you're correct to say probably the single most important mission of the Navy.
We're in a transition now, if I understand correctly, between the Ohio-class SSBNs, the boomers, and the Columbia-class. Is that adequately funded? Is that moving along, in your opinion, Senator?
Yeah, I think that part of our naval power, I think Washington has been aware of. The Navy has made those ships a priority. If that were the only issue, John, Jerry and I wouldn't have written this article, and I don't think we'd be concerned. The problem is the ability of the Navy to perform its conventional missions, given that the Navy is so much smaller than it used to be. John, your watchers and listeners may be interested. In the 1990s, when I went to Washington, the outgoing H.W. Bush administration projected that we would need somewhere around 430 ships going forward. The Clinton administration lowered that to 346 ships. Well, even 346 ships are more than 50 ships above what we now have. And remember, the 1990s were a time of relative peace in the world. China was weak. Russia was friendly. There was no global terrorist threat. North Korea didn't have nuclear weapons. And yet we are substantially below the lowest estimate of what we thought we needed then.
Jerry, I come to you for the second mission, the Great White Fleet. What does that mean?
Well, that's the show the flag aspect of naval operations. It's naval presence. It's a topic you and I have talked about several times in the past. But it's in the importance of keeping this fleet out there to establish U.S. national interest and then uphold them, to demonstrate that we are interested in these regions of the world, that we have, whether it's economic or whether it's a diplomatic interest or for that matter, military interest, given the fact that we have 50 allies, treaty allies in the world. These ships have to go forward in order to demonstrate that we have an interest and that we are willing to back up those interests with hard power. And so again, this comes back to this idea of how many ships do we have to have at sea at any given time. The ballistic missile submarines that we just talked about, well, we only keep about 4 of those at sea at any given moment, and that gives us sufficient assured second strike capability. The rest of the 130 to 150 ships, that is generally your aircraft carriers, your cruisers, your destroyers, and even your fast attack submarines, as well as the amphibs. Those are out there to demonstrate specific capabilities in specific interest areas. And we are unable to do that and have been unable to do that for almost 2 decades now.
You mentioned icebreaker. Oh, go ahead, Senator.
Very briefly, John, it's where the expression "show the flag" comes from, which everybody's familiar with. It's a naval expression. The Navy's, and this is a task that's really very peculiar, specific to the Navy. The Navy shows America's commitment, presence, and interest in various parts of the world, and it can only do that if ships are there. We can't make ports of call with ships we don't have. And right now we're struggling to keep about 90 ships deployed every day. Well, think about how big the oceans are. So it's a real problem, and we are gapping presence all over the world. We are not in places where we know we need to be.
Yes, you included a very clever quote by George Kennan, the esteemed diplomat. Quote, "You have no idea how much it contributes to the politeness and pleasance of diplomacy when you have a little armed force in the background." I'm reminded, Jerry, of "Bring me Perdicaris alive or bring me Rasooli dead." That would have been Teddy Roosevelt's most famous line that he maybe didn't say. What does that mean, Jerry?
Well, at the time, that was the Perdicaris affair, where an alleged American citizen, and I say alleged because subsequently we found out historically that Ian Perdicaris was not an American citizen at that point in time, but he had been kidnapped by a brigand in the hills of Morocco And Theodore Roosevelt ended up sending 3 cruiser divisions to show the flag and demonstrate American resolve in order to recover Perdicaris, back from this brigand, this pirate that was up in the hills. And so it was the use of naval power in order to demonstrate America's interest, America's resolve, a red line. And in the end, Perdicaris was returned.
Yes, and it was convenient that it happened in the month of June during the nominating convention for the presidency. But in any event, I turned to Mission 3, Senator. That is trade, free trade. At one time, the United Kingdom, the British Empire, was in charge of free trade. They're down to 70 ships, your reporting says. Now the U.S. is burdened by that. The Red Sea would be evidence that that mission is vital, and the U.S. is the only one who can carry it out. Do our allies acknowledge that, Senator? Are they ready to help?
Yeah, in some circumstances, they certainly are. And we have had international efforts to stop piracy that have been successful in suppressing. And unfortunately, John, as you mentioned with regard to the British, our allies have allowed their fleets to decline as well. So even collectively, we don't have the ships we used to have. Actually, the last, and Jerry would know this for certain, but when they formed the coalition to stop piracy, I believe it was about 10 or 12 years ago, the Chinese played a role in it. In other words, we had to use or rely to some degree on their ships because they have a substantial navy and we really don't. John, the right of citizens of the United States to move, trade, and travel in the world on the same terms as everybody else in safety is a vital national interest of the United States. In fact, we've fought wars basically over that, going to the first war, which was against the Tripoli pirates. The War of 1812 started in large part because the British were interfering with our shipping. World War I, when the Germans declared that they were going to sink neutral vessels. This is something we cannot permit, and yet if without a sufficient navy, we're going to see not just piracy, but political attacks on ships as well.
Yeah, John, I would just point out to iterate what the senator just said, of the 7 times that the Congress has declared war for the country in our history, 5 of the 7 times have been over maritime issues. So maritime has always been at the forefront of our national interest. It has been consistently a place where the nation has deemed it important enough to actually take the ultimate sanction and declare war.
Is it the Navy's opinion that they have sufficient ships now to rally in the event of a Taiwan tragedy?
Yes, I believe the Navy would say that, yes, it does have sufficient capability. However, those of us who look carefully at the numbers have significant questions about that. The Navy said that if we took everything that's in the Pacific and we flooded into the region, effectively we could have a majority of the combatant fleet in and around the Western Pacific first island chain at the end of 2 weeks, which is sort of our rolling start methodology. However, looking at the readiness numbers, for instance, right now, we've had 3 aircraft carriers at sea. That is 3 of the operating 10, because there's always one in the yards having its nuclear reactors refueled. So that's 30% of the force that's been forward deployed now. The Ford's been extended. She is on her way home. But you also have the Eisenhower and the Stennis have been at sea. Reagan is sortied a couple of times. That means that we burned a lot of readiness in the carrier strike groups. If I look at the cruisers, well, we had 22 Ticonderoga cruisers. We've retired 5 or 7 of them now, and we're going to retire a bunch more this year. That's a significant amount of missile tubes in the inventory that's going away. Our Burke class are getting quite old. The Flight 1s are reaching nearly 40 years of age. The Arleigh Burke itself was commissioned when I was a lieutenant junior grade back in the early 1990s. And so we're seeing that the fleet is rapidly aging, and we are not replacing ships as they retire. And so every year we go forward, our readiness actually gets worse. And this is something that I believe the Chinese have been very aware of and have been tracking very closely. Our submarine force, 40% of our fast attack boats right now are unable to get underway because they are behind in maintenance. So while I think the Navy would say, for public posturing reasons, that, yeah, we're ready to go, we can fight this, I have some questions. And I say that as a loyal American and a proud former officer of the United States Navy. I have serious concerns that we are steering into shoal waters.
Senator,
We're out-
your
Yeah.
correspondence with your colleagues when you were Seapower Subcommittee, is there anxiety among the senior officers and the retired officers about the size of the Navy and the challenge immediately?
Oh, yeah, there's a great deal of anxiety. The last commander of Indo-PACOM, Admiral Davidson, said that he anticipated that there could be or could well be a war over Taiwan by 2027. It's known now as the Davidson window. I mean, the fact of the matter is a lot of people are concerned that deterrence is failing in Indo-PACOM. And there's a lot of reasons for that, John. I think the biggest is that we are outnumbered in ships west of Hawaii 5-1 by the Chinese. They have a total fleet of around 370 ships. Ours is about 80 less than that. They can concentrate virtually the entire force inside of their first and second island chains. Ours have global requirements. And moreover, and this actually, John, may be the worst part of the problem, we don't have the shipyard capability to produce ships quickly, even if we wanted to. The Chinese have, I mean, Secretary Del Torres, the current Navy Secretary, said a few months ago, the Chinese have one shipyard, which by itself has greater capacity than all of ours. So this disproportion is going to grow in the near future. And there's a lot of people concerned that deterrence is failing.
Jerry, your measure right now of the PLA Navy, is it capable of taking on the U.S. Navy, given that you said there was a lag of when the Navy would rally its forces? Is the PLA Navy our peer in the inside the first and second island chain?
Well, John, there's a couple of different metrics that you have to look at. One is the metric of missile tubes and torpedo tubes. And so by them having the home field advantage, they're operating from their home ports in close proximity with logistical hubs and resupply. I would tell you, as the senator just suggested, that they have a numerical majority when it comes to missile tubes and torpedo tubes in the region, first and second island chain. Whether their weapons are as good as ours, whether their ships are as technologically as capable of ours, really doesn't matter, because in the aggregate, they're going to bring more capability within their capacity just by having sheer numbers in that area. Now, whether China is ready to risk politically that type of a fight in which they would lose a large number of ships, we would lose some as well, and those ships would be in their home waters with their home audience. That's really the question here. And so the question is their willingness, their national will versus our willingness and our national will. They are perceiving very much right now that our national will and our combat credibility is in decline. And we can see that being tested right now in the Red Sea region, where our ships are being fired upon by Iranian proxies, and we are not striking back either at those proxies ashore or at their sponsors in Iran. So China's taking a gauge on American national will right now, and I think they're finding us wanting.
Jim Talent, former U.S. Senator from the state of Missouri, chaired the Seapower Subcommittee, currently chairman of the National Leadership Council Reagan Institute. Jerry Hendrix, retired U.S. Navy captain aviator, senior fellow at the Sagamore Institute, writing most recently at the National Review Online. I'm John Batchelor.